Hey guys, this is going to be my spoiler book talk on What We Saw by Aaron Hartzler. I'd like to start out by talking about some of the characters. In my opinion, Kate and Will Weston seem to be the most fully developed characters in the book, although there were multiple times where Kate's inner monologues just didn't seem that genuine to me. For me, it read very much like an adult trying to write a teenage character. Kate's character seemed very forced. I just didn't feel as though I was hearing Kate's voice. It felt much more like the author was using Kate to speak through her. And all of the other characters were very one-dimensional, and that made a lot of the situations in the book feel very stereotypical instead of genuine and real. To me, the book can be split up into these distinct sections almost. We have the first section that takes place starting the morning after the party happened, where the photos are getting released on social media and everyone is talking about Stacy and the kind of person she is, what she was wearing, and are kind of discussing for themselves whether or not Stacy was quote unquote asking for it by wearing what she wore to the party. The second section focused more around consent and ultimately ended up with Kate and Ben having sex for the first time, but we'll talk more about that later. The third section for me focused mostly on feminism and women's rights, and the final section was more about Kate's decision to do what is right and all of the aftermath that followed. There's nothing wrong with having those semi-distinct sections, even though the book itself wasn't split up into sections, but I did wish that when the book was moving from one section to the next, that everything blended together more, because as you move throughout the book, the previous topics almost weren't touched on again. So when we are talking about consent, we weren't really talking about whether Stacy was asking for it or not. And when Kate was making her decision on what to do, none of the other arguments that were touched on in the past, such as feminism, women's rights, consent, what Stacy was wearing, or anything like that was really brought up again. I felt like Aaron Hartzler very much relied on the reader to make those connections, and for me, I just wish that it all would have blended together cohesively instead of kind of leaving off one issue and moving on to the next. It almost felt like they took all of the most stereotypical, I hate that word, I don't want to use that word, but all of the most stereotypical issues and arguments surrounding this subject of ultimately rape and kind of putting it all together, but it didn't blend very well for me, if that makes sense. Now I want to talk about very briefly a few specific things that I had a bit of an issue with in this book. The first of which being Kate and Ben's relationship. I really did feel like their relationship kind of took away from the point of the story at times, which is really ironic because in the chapter where they go and see Greece, Kate talks about in her inner monologue how Greece uses flashy music to almost distract the audience from what's really going on. And in a way, I almost feel like that's what Aaron Hartzler was doing with this romance. I truly feel like I could have gotten the same reaction, the same feeling from Kate finding out that Ben was in the video and going through all of those different emotions if the two of them were just really close, lifelong friends and neighbors possibly. I didn't feel it was very necessary to have them be in a relationship, because although their relationship was established before the book began, I did feel like they rushed into dating, rushed into having sex, and then everything just happened really fast. It was almost insta-lovey, but I can't even call it insta-love because they had obviously known each other all their lives. I just felt like their romance was very distracting. Speaking of the chapter when they go and see Greece, that's also the chapter when Kate ends up deciding that she wants to have sex with Ben, and I definitely want to talk about that. I thought it was incredibly contradictory for a chapter to be so focused around the issue of consent and whether Stacy could have consented, to ultimately be the chapter where Kate goes home with Ben, drinks a little Bacardi, but in her words, not too much, and then has sex with him. How much Bacardi is too much Bacardi for a 17-year-old high school student? If you're intoxicated at all, you can't give consent, and if you're under the age of 18, you can't legally give consent either. Whether Kate followed Ben upstairs on her own free will or not is beside the point. And because of that, this section really bothered me. Also, what was the point of that whole paragraph when they were kind of getting ready to have sex that is used to say if this was a TV moment there would be a fade to black, and use it as kind of saying this isn't a TV moment, it was awkward, we fumbled around a lot, he had to search for condoms, when at the end ultimately there was a fade to black moment. So I don't understand why that whole part was necessary if Aaron Hartzler was just going to have a typical YA fade to black moment. It didn't make sense to me. It was all just very contradictory to me, especially later in the book after the video was found. There was definitely no detail that was spared about the incidents that took place in that video. Another small point, very briefly, that I didn't care for was how Rachel's religion and beliefs were used so stereotypically in this book. I just really didn't think that it was fair to be using religion that way, especially when the book already deals with such a sensitive topic, especially in YA. Honestly, I almost gave this book 3 stars, and about halfway through the book, I was already trying to figure out how I was going to tastefully discuss all of the reasons why I wouldn't be recommending this book. And then in the last 100 pages, the video was released and everything started coming together. I just wish that the last 100 pages could have been the way that the entire book was written. Ultimately, I decided that no matter what issues I had with the plot or the characters, that the message was the most important part of this entire book. The main idea that I took away from this book is that words have power, of course, and stuff that you put on the internet can stay there forever, so be careful. I ultimately ended up feeling as though it was really important to get all of that information on the town and Ben and everyone that they talked about, because later on it just showed that the media didn't care about anyone in that town or who anyone was. They just cared about the story, and that happens in everyday life. And so it's really important to take everything that you see on social media and on the news with a grain of salt, because ultimately you're not getting the whole story and you don't know everything about that person in that town from this article that you're reading on Facebook. Honestly, I think it's a little ironic in the end that I'm putting this up on a social media platform, because the book does end with Kate basically saying, you know, sometimes it's okay to turn the phones off, turn the cameras off, and let your heart and mind record the memories for themselves. I think that's definitely a message that we can all take to heart and take forward with us in our everyday lives. Social media does have a hold on today's generation, and it can be really harmful. And that is my thoughts and feelings on what we saw by Aaron Hartzler. I really did enjoy this book, and I think that the message is an extremely important one, especially for teenagers these days. So let me know down in the comments what you thought about this book. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!